moment of never giving up, that's when I first learned. I used to spend the night in hotel parking lots. Everything I had was in 2 bags.
How can a man who makes everyone laugh be so hurt? Steve Harvey, who was known as the King of Comedy, made a fortune with jokes, gags, and scars. At age 68, his life has been more than just famous. It's been a story of loss, struggle, and making it through.
Because most people, including myself, we don't understand the process. You know, like now when something negative happens, I understand the process because I've learned over the years that everything you're going through is God preparing you for what you asked for.
From being hurt as a child to being shamed in public, his story will shock you. Listen up, because what Steve Harvey went through to become famous will shock you. The paper that tore a boy. Steve Harvey's story doesn't start with laughter, fame, or nice clothes. It starts in Welch, West Virginia, a coal town where people often buried their hopes as deep as the mines. His dad, Jesse, worked underground all his life. The coal dust in his lungs stained his lungs, and the long shifts he worked hurt his body. Eloise, his mother, taught school and lived on very little money until it broke. It seemed like they were always short on money and food. Life in their house was always hard. Things didn't change much when the family moved to East 112th Street in Cleveland. Every day was a lesson in how to stay alive. The streets were cracked, and the shoes were getting worn out. People in the neighborhood didn't grow up dreaming. They grew up surviving. For most of the kids there, the walls around them already told them what would happen. Try your best to stay alive and pay your bills if you're lucky. Steve was different, though. One thing was wrong. He spoke slowly. Simple words were shattered, jagged, and torn before they could fall. It was a risk every time he spoke in class. Kids around him laughed, made fun of him, and whispered. The teacher sighed. Steve saw language not as a tool, but as a battleground. And every day, he lost. This hurt me the most on a normal afternoon at school. The students were told to write down what they wished they were when they grew up. Steve wrote the words that had been burning inside him. I want to be on TV. He was a skinny boy with holes in his shoes and a fire in his chest. First, the room was silent. Then everyone laughed out loud. The teacher looked at him like he had just told her he was crazy. She tore the paper in half right in front of him and told him not to be so proud. Steve couldn't get rid of the sound of paper breaking in a quiet classroom for years. When he got home, his mother was ashamed, but his dad saw something else. Harvey told his son to write it again, stick it on the wall. Every morning and night, read it. Not as a wish, but as a promise.
My father never talked to me about God, never talked to me about prayer, faith. All he talked to me about was hard work. Hard work, be a man, take care of your family.
For Steve, those words were like holy books. The promise got stronger every day. Every time he did it, it turned his spirit into steel. That piece of paper became very important to him. Steve never forgot what happened years later when the impossible happened. Every Christmas, he sent that teacher a brand new TV through the mail. The boy you laughed at was now in every living room in America. That was the only note that was written. The boy with the stutter and the torn dream changed the story for everyone who didn't believe in him. In Cleveland, East 112th Street was renamed Steve Harvey Way as a lasting legacy. But here is the horror that was going on behind the scenes at that time. The cut didn't really get better. It turned into an obsession as it got worse. Being made fun of as a child made me afraid of being small, forgotten, and normal. Steve pushed himself further, worked longer, and gave up more than anyone else to get rid of his fear. He wasn't just trying to be successful. He was running away from the sound of the torn paper. That fear which he got in a classroom in Cleveland, would follow him into marriage, into empty hotel rooms, and into nights when cheers couldn't stop the echoes. What makes a man go from being shamed in class to being born again on stage, and then being homeless for 3 years? The answer is sad and hopeful at the same time. It's the next part of the tragic story of Steve Harvey. 3 years in a car. When Steve Harvey's life broke open in 1985, it was in a smoky comedy club in Cleveland. He wasn't supposed to act. A friend pushed him to do it. His heart was racing, and he was having trouble speaking, but then he started to laugh. Not just a few laughs, but real, loud laughing that shook the room. He felt free for the first time. The host gave him $50 at the end of the night. For most, it was just extra money. Steve thought it was air. He walked out into the cold air with tears running down his face and told himself in a whisper that he was finally born. He quit his job the very next morning. However, fate rarely gives without taking. The stage that gave him life also took away his home. Steve had no place to go because he wasn't making any money. He lived in the back seat of a 1976 Ford for the next 3 years. He used that car as a bedroom, kitchen, and jail. There were bologna sandwiches in the trunk for days in a cooler. He used the sinks at gas stations as bathrooms and the showers at public pools as high-end spas. In the middle of the night, his breath made the cracked glass look foggy, and he was hungry. Getting through that week is awful. For 3 years, he did it. The shame never went away. That's because he was afraid that someone would look in the window and find out his secret. Everyone thought he was a star comedian. He was really a man trying not to drown. He was ready to quit more than once. One night, he had the phone in his hand and was about to call his dad to tell him he had lost. He did press play on his answering machine, though, before he called. It flashed 2 texts. One was a club in Jacksonville that was giving away $150. The other was a gig for the same amount of money the next night. There are $300, which is just enough for a plane ticket to New York. His whole life changed with that one moment, that one button, that one pause. He was put to the test when strangers stepped in. Rich and Becky Liss, a couple who believed in him, hired him to clean carpets and gave him money to pay for trips. Their kindness brought back respect at a time when it was almost gone because of survival. After many years, Steve would thank them on national TV, his voice breaking as he spoke. It wasn't business at that time. It was about remembering who helped him stay standing when he was about to fall. Harlem came next. He got to test himself at the Apollo Theater, which is known as the scariest stage in comedy. First as one of the finalists in the Johnny Walker National Comedy Search, and then as the show's host. The boy who was made fun of for stuttering now led Harlem's toughest groups. Every laugh was more than just funny. It was leather. How does a man who was finally free from hunger and shame lose the people who were most important to him? That's the next sad part of Steve Harvey's story. The broken families, the loneliness, and the son who had been hurt the most. Laughter's invoice. Steve Harvey said he would never marry anyone again when he was only 24 years old. He married Marcia because she believed in him even when he only had jokes to tell and a lot of anger in his heart. The 2 sets of twins, Brandy and Carly, and the son Broderick Jr., were born to them together. For a while, their house was full of laughter, but not the kind that made people cheer. It was the sound of kids chasing each other through small rooms in a house where the cupboards sounded empty. The 1980s were very bad. Steve did odd jobs in small towns that barely paid enough for gas. He did odd jobs, sold insurance, scrubbed floors, and did anything else he could to make ends meet when the shows didn't pay. When you spent the night in a club, You missed your home in the morning. A lot of the time, the fridge was empty, and Marcia carried the weight of it all by herself. He finally told the truth, which had been bothering him for years. I lost my family chasing the dream. In 1994, there was a quiet but very sad split. There was no scandal in the tabloids or in the news. He just fell apart, leaving him with doubts and children who never had a father at the dinner table. He tried again after 2 years. Steve got married to Mary in 1996. His work was finally picking up speed, with parts in sitcoms, national tours, and more fame. He thought that with Mary by his side, he could rebuild the home he had lost. When their son Wynton was born in 1997, Steve felt like he had finally made things right. He thought about what was most important as he held the boy in his arms, a second chance to do things right. But the storm came back. Steve's work took off, but he spent less time at home. Dinners were missed, and then birthdays were missed. The bag stayed near the door, packed. Mary wanted to feel safe, but the road pulled him farther away. The fights got worse, and by the early 2000s, the marriage was falling apart. Not like the first breakup, this one was seen by everyone. Headlines were full of accusations against him, painting him in colors he barely knew. Some of the claims were thrown out by the courts, but the people didn't care about the decisions. For them, the picture of the family man was broken. In depositions, microphones that were once used for entertainment were turned into weapons. Wynton was the one who left the biggest scar. He saw his parents' marriage fall apart when he was only 8 years old. Since he lived with his mother, he only saw his father on weekends, holidays, and during free time. Years later, Steve admitted that the real pain wasn't the tabloids or the stress of money problems. He carried his guilt with him through airports and hotel rooms for years, even when people were chanting his name. Destiny did offer a small bit of mercy, though. Wynton chose to live with Steve when he was a teenager. He called it his choice and his second shot. Steve thought it was a surprise and proof that relationships can get better even after bad times. The fall in full view. To his surprise, Steve Harvey walked into a bank when he thought things would calm down and saw a number on the screen that made fun of him. Won $1,700. Being embarrassed hurt more than being poor ever had for a man whose face was on billboards and whose voice filled stadiums. People thought he was rich, couldn't be hurt, and didn't have to work for anything. Behind the smile, he was about to lose all of his money. The finding that came after it made things even worse. Because of a terrible mistake in his accounts, he hadn't filed his taxes for 7 years. Principal, interest, and fines kept adding up, like vultures flying around above his head. The amount of debt got so big that going to jail and being shamed became real options. He didn't sleep at night. Instead, he stared at the ceilings of hotel rooms, his mind filled with numbers and fear. His new friends were calculators, prayer, and cold sweat. Steve needed a plan that would last as long as the hunger he felt in his car if he wanted to stay alive. He turned to rules and order. At 4 a.m., when most people in the city were still asleep, he was already on his morning radio show. Puns that are given with accuracy but are driven by fear. Each payment had a job to do. He was so tired from the radio in the morning, meetings during the day, and comedy at night that he could barely walk. But he couldn't quit. The grind showed up in his work. In 2009, he wrote Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man. And in 2010, he wrote Straight Talk, No Chaser. These are books that many people read for advice, but they were lifelines for him. Every page he wrote was a wall that kept his creditors away, another brick in the wall that kept hopelessness from breaking through. Then there was the event that made his name a worldwide joke. Miss Universe in December 2015. He read the wrong name and crowned the wrong queen while 1 billion people watched. The theater got very cold. There were gasps all over the room. Cameras caught him in a rage. In that moment, all the work of a lifetime seemed to be undone. In spite of this, he did something that not many people would try. He had it. He said sorry, but his voice was shaky, and he had no pride left. Memes, late-night jokes, and news stories that called his job into question were mean. But he came back to host again the very next year. Steve Harvey thought that bravery wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up with scars, but no breaks. But fate wasn't done yet. His talk show, Steve, was taken off the air by NBC in 2019. He found out almost at the same time as everyone else. That kind of blow would feel like a removal to a lot of people. He didn't get angry or cry during his last recording. He held on to one stage through it all. Family Fight. Steve has been hosting the show since 2010, and in just 3 years, it became a huge hit. The people who saw him loved him, but a big chunk of his pay went to the IRS. After standing ovations, wire transfers took place. It wasn't fancy, but time was still his enemy, even after he beat money, shame, and the weight of being known for bad things. By the time it was almost 70, the kingdom was still standing, but the body started sending warnings that could not be stopped by cheers. And this last fight would test not only his will, but also his ability to stay alive. Grace with a deadline. Steve Harvey met Marjorie again in 2005. He was 50 years old, had been through a divorce, was in debt, and was carrying the weight of mistakes that almost broke him. He had pointed to her from a stage in Memphis years before and said he would marry her one day. At that time, life took them apart, but fate brought them back together. After 2 years, they got married. Harvey found not only a partner, but also the peace he had been looking for all his life with her. It's not just money that he says 85% of what he has came after he married her. It's also peace of mind. Together, they made a mixed-race family of 7. Their son Winton lives with them, along with his 3 kids, her 3 kids, and him. He gave her kids his last name, not to show that he owned them, but to let them know that they belonged. Over time, regularity took the place of absence. After-school runs, quiet talks, and meals with friends. The word "dad" became more than just a title for him for the first time. It became who he was. Michael Marjorie's son Jason told him on TV in 2015, "There's no one better than you, Dad." Steve cried out loud, not as a comic or host, but as a man who had finally been forgiven. His work reflected that change. Steve Harvey went into radio, TV, books, production, and foreign versions of Family Feud across Africa through Steve Harvey Global. He even hosted the Botswana edition of the show himself. It was great to see Celebrity Family Feud on ABC. It was his own quest for health that led him to start Levate-U, a supplement brand that is linked to his philosophy: never count on one stream. His kingdom was no longer in danger. It was made stronger. He made his move permanent in 2020 when he bought Tyler Perry's old home in Atlanta. It was 17 acres, 35,000 square feet, and had a gym, spa, theater, and even an underground ballroom. He finally had a fortress after decades of moving around a lot in cars, rentals, and hotels. The watches, garage, and boats he owned were less about luxury and more about showing who he was. Every big step whispered, "I made it." But the body has its own books. Every day, his high blood pressure, sleep apnea, and autoimmune symptoms told him that time builds interest that no empire can erase. He lost 30 pounds by following strict plans, taking vitamins, and being disciplined. In spite of the perfect suits and trendy clothes, the cuff of a blood pressure monitor waited in silence. At 68, Steve Harvey's story is a heartbreaking reminder of scars turned into strength. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click the next video popping up on your screen.